Okay, we're good. We're live.
All right. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the 2024 Big Idea Challenge Q&A session for the upcoming Lunar Inflatables theme. We're going to go ahead and get started here in just a second, but wanted to give just another probably 60 seconds or so just to let a few extra folks come in before we dive in. So if you haven't already, if you could go ahead and mute your mic at the beginning, and we'll provide some instructions later where you'll have the ability to ask questions at the end, time permitting. But for right now, if you wouldn't mind muting those mics, that would be great. We'll get started in just a few. And don't feel any pressure to have your camera on if you don't want to have your camera on. For those of you who just joined in, we're going to give it about another 30 seconds before we kick off the official start of the Q&A session here. All right, I think we have waited long enough. So let's go ahead and kick it off. So if you didn't hear the original welcome, let me say it one more time. Welcome to the 2024 Breakthrough, Innovative, and Game-Changing, or Big Idea Challenge Q&A session. We're really glad that you all are here and that you've taken some time out of your busy schedules to kind of hear a little bit more about the challenge, to get your questions answered. We're incredibly excited to begin this discussion with you. And let me start by introducing myself. I'm Stacy Dees. I am the Big Idea Program Manager from the National Institute of Aerospace. And I'm going to go ahead and do a little bit of welcome and introductions. But before we get to that, I want to take care of just a little bit of some housekeeping items. First and foremost, we are recording this session. And as such, that recording will be posted on our FAQs page later on, as well as a full copy of these slides. So you don't have to take screenshots, you don't need to take notes. We're going to make sure that you have access to all of this information for you on the FAQ side. So just sit back, enjoy. If you've got questions that come up, feel free to pop them in the chat as we go along, and we'll answer them toward the end of the session. Or if you just want to wait and raise your hand, we'll get to an opportunity where we can call on you and you can verbally ask your question as well. So we've got some options for you as we move forward. The other request is that we please ask everybody to mute your mics so that at the beginning, as some of our NASA and NIA and APL speakers are speaking, that everybody can hear them loud and clear. And when we get to that open Q&A session at the end, then once we call on you, you'd be welcome to unmute yourself at that point. But until then, please keep those microphones muted. As we begin to kind of talk a little bit about the challenge, I just wanted to let everybody know that we are thrilled with the variety of concepts that we've seen, those early concepts that you guys shared with us at the NOI stage. We know that we had a little bit of a late start, kind of getting the challenge announced, and want to apologize for that. There were some contracting issues that were outside of everybody's control, and we did the very best that we could by getting this out. But even with the shortened time frame for you all to respond, we did just have a really cool variety of those concepts. The judges want to see them all, so we really encourage you that as you move forward, we hope that this Q&A session will inspire you to really just jump in, dive in, get those proposals submitted, because we really truly do want to see all of the ideas that were submitted. It's very fun, cool, and exciting. And I think that this is going to be one of the most fun challenges that we've had to date. So we're incredibly excited about that. All right, let's go ahead and Amy, if you wouldn't mind moving to the next slide. So this is just a brief overview of what we're going to be talking about today. Um, we'll go through and introduce you to some of the big players in the 2024 challenge world so that as we move forward and begin interacting with you, you'll know who you're talking to. We're going to give you a little bit of background and context for the 2024 challenge. We'll go over a couple of proposal tips, which include tips for things that we've seen have kind of trapped folks up in the past, and we want to make sure that you don't get stuck in some of those same traps. So we really hope that you'll take those tips to heart. Then we'll jump into some of the questions that we received in advance, starting with the more technical focused questions, moving on into the programmatic questions. And at that point, there should be time permitting, but we'll open up the floor at that point for some additional questions. And then we've just got a couple of wrap-up items for you. And as we jump in here, wanted to let everybody know that there is kind of a cool option to access captions if you would like that option. And there's some instructions there on the screen, but basically we just ask that you would select more up at the top of this Microsoft Teams menu, and there should be an option to choose language and speech, and then followed by turn on live captions. So if you'd like to have that option, please feel free to take the minute to do that. And as we do that, let's jump into our first set of introductions here. So I have the honor today of introducing to you kind of the who's who of the Big Idea Challenge world. Starting here on the left is our fearless leader, Shelly Spears. And if any of you folks are on the call and you have the ability to turn your camera on and give a little wave, please feel free. That would be great. Shelly leads a big team at the NIA of both pre-college and collegiate and even some postdoctoral work. And then myself, Stacey Dees, program manager. We also have Amy McCluskey and Janice Miller, who are program folks that are supporting the challenge, and you'll be hearing lots and lots of emails from them over the course of your participation in the challenge. So this team here at NIA, we're kind of the primary focal point, the people that you will be interacting with most often, and kind of serve as a liaison to some of the other folks that I'm getting ready to introduce you to. So let's go ahead and move to that next slide. And if you just joined us, if you wouldn't mind muting your mic. And Amy or Janice, if you have the ability to go in and actually mute folks, that would be great. Thank you. So we just introduced the NIA team, and one of the things that I'm excited to share with you all, you are the first to hear this kind of very officially, but the Big Idea Challenge has undergone some pretty significant changes from years past, including a new partnership with the Johns Hopkins University Applied Physics Laboratory. And the Applied Physics Laboratory, or APL, as I'll kind of refer to it here on out, they really are just providing a wealth of technical expertise and guidance from subject matter experts, in particular from its Lunar Surface Innovation Initiative, which you'll hear a little bit about in just a few minutes. So we are thrilled to introduce you to the core management team from APL who will be supporting the Big Idea Challenge. First, we have Brenda Clyde, who is the LSII Big Idea Project Manager, Laura Costantino, who is the LSII Big Idea Deputy Program Manager, and Dr. Rebecca Masterson, who is the LSII Big Idea Technical Lead and has already been providing us a wealth of technical help and support and guidance over the past few weeks as she's the newest member of the team to join. So we're incredibly glad that we've got these folks supporting us in our corner and here to provide more information to you all as you move forward in your proposal process. And I have one more group of folks that I'd like to introduce you to, if you don't mind going to that next slide, Amy. This is our amazing panel of judges. So each year, the Big Idea Challenge gets a new panel of judges that are comprised of subject matter experts in the field, whatever the theme is for that year. And so this is our lineup of the 2024 Challenge judges, each of whom have expertise in various aspects of inflatable systems for lunar operations. It's an absolutely superstar panel of judges, and we are incredibly lucky to have them sharing their time and knowledge with all of the Big Idea Challenge participants. So We have their names here. I'm going to go through them really quickly, but if you'd like to learn a little bit more about them, we actually have some bios for each of the judges on our judges page for the 2024 year. So feel free to take a peek at that and learn a little bit more about them and their expertise. The panel is co-chaired by two fantastic individuals, Kevin Kempton, who is a long-term champion or a long-time champion of the Big Idea Challenge. He comes from NASA Langley Research Center. Doug Lyttikin is with us from the NASA Johnson Space Center. And then moving through the rest of our judging panel, from APL, we have Dr. Athanu Chatterjee. From NASA Langley Researcher, we have Tom Jones. From APL, we have Dr. Melania Graziano. From Rising Technologies, we have Ryan Gunling. From NASA Langley Research Center, we have Dr. Lin Ho Kang. From APL, we have Dr. Michael Nord. And from NASA headquarters, we have Ariana Sanchez. So for all of our judges, we thank you so much for taking the time to put these technical proposal guidelines together, for answering all the questions that come in, and for serving as reviewers and amazing evaluators in evaluating the proposal. So these are the folks who are going to be reviewing your proposals. Go learn about them. And once you learn about them, you'll probably start finding other resources that will help you with the proposal, and you'll know the things that they're interested in and the things that they have contributed in the area of lunar operations and structures and soft goods and all those fun things. So definitely encourage you to take a peek at that. Thank you, judges. All right, now let's get into the good stuff. So I would like to turn the microphone over to one of our co-chairs, Doug Lyttikin. Doug is going to share with you all a little bit about the background and context for this year's theme and why NASA is sponsoring the challenge. Doug, take it away.
Yeah, thank you, Stacy. Just make sure you guys can hear me. Yes, okay, great. Yeah, so as Stacy said, I work a lot on inflatable structures, soft good structures. And so we're really excited about this. We're looking at using inflatables and soft goods for lunar operations. And we've done a lot of work in the past on inflatable habitats. So looking at building a large scale habitat for larger crews to live and work on the surface of the moon or on Mars. And this year we want to focus not on habitats, but on other concepts that you can use inflatable technology for. You know, specifically like other calls, we're looking for lightweight, small mass, small size, small power technologies that we're trying to develop. And one of the big advantages of inflatables, just like expandable structures, you can launch it in a very small volume, and then you can inflate it and you can get something very large out of a small package. And that's really our big advantage. You can also potentially reduce weight depending on what the structure is. And perhaps it uses less power, uses different kind of technology, things like that. So there's a whole list of things here, and I think Kevin's going to give you some examples in the next chart. But I want to just sort of define inflatables a little bit as to how we look at them. So you've seen like an expandable structure, for example. Expandable is a term that some people use for inflatables, but expandable can be something that doesn't have any gas inside of it. So it's essentially like a collapsible or telescoping tube that can be an expandable structure. It, you know, goes from a small volume to a large volume. The inflatable is something that also expands, it changes shape, but it has an internal pressure in order to get to that final shape, or at least move into a different position with some sort of internal gas. That doesn't mean it always requires internal gas. It could be something that has gas, inflates, and then gets rigidized, and then you don't need the gas to be there anymore. Or sometimes you need the gas always to be there to hold it into shape, or during your operation, and then you can take the gas back out or put it back in or something like that, depending on what you're building. So these, you know, inflatable concepts we're looking for are things that are not habitats, but are other items, antennas, deployable offloading systems, cranes, pressurized tunnels, airlocks, anything that's not a habitat, but requires a gas to sort of increase in size. All right, then I'll pass it back to Kevin to talk about some of the applications.
Actually, before Kevin jumps in, Doug, if you don't mind, I'm going to jump in, and I put in, there's a note at the bottom here in bright green we did see that there were a bunch of media outlets that picked up on NASA's feature story announcing the challenge, but they picked up some information incorrectly. And I think they actually thought that this is a habitat challenge. So just want to make sure that if you're reading articles out there that indicate that the Big Idea Challenge this year is a habitat challenge, they are wrong. They're incorrect. Only look at the NASA material that's put out there and the information that's put out there on the Big Idea Challenge website.
Yeah, thanks, Stacey. I wanted to mention something. Some of those articles talk about NASA wants bounce houses on the moon. We're not looking for bounce houses. One thing I want you to do is think about the tires on your cars. Now, these are highly effective inflatable systems that take heavy loads. They operate in pretty extreme environments. They require very little maintenance. They're pretty low mass for their size and volume, and they're highly effective, cost-effective systems. So think about the tires on your car as an inflatable system, and even then, they're advancing technology on tires all the time. You've got pressure monitoring systems in your cars now. You've got a lot of them they're starting to talk about self-sealing materials and other things. So it's a good example of an inflatable system that would be effective on the lunar surface. And one thing on inflatable system, think about, we just launched a flight demo on the HIAD system, which was a hypersonic inflatable aerodynamic decelerator. And this thing came into Earth's atmosphere at miles per second, extreme environments to slow a large mass down. And so these inflatable systems can be very robust, and there's a lot of potential uses for them. So I want the teams to go and start thinking about use cases, and I'll talk a little bit about the NASA taxonomy later on. And the NASA taxonomy we invested a lot of effort to develop, identify the needs, the technology needs for operating on the moon, and we'll talk a little bit about that. But you can think outside the box, or you can think about an existing capability that and what you would be doing is making it more cost effective, because if we can't afford to put things on the moon, obviously they're not going to get on the moon. And inflatables, like Doug said, have the potential for much lower mass and a much lower package volume, which are two critical things for getting payloads on the lunar surface. And so think about that as you're doing your proposals. We'll talk a little bit about use cases. And like I said, this is a little bit different from the paper studies that you're used to. We're looking for a working system, a demonstration of some technology, mostly hardware, but software can be included if it's a mobile system. We want you to learn these system engineering skills that you don't typically get in college, where you actually have to build and verify systems. This is what makes the Big Idea Challenge such a remarkable challenge. We're not looking for a typical paper study. We're looking for teams to do the hand-on building, and you're going to have to learn systems engineering skills. You're going to have to learn project management skills, and we want you to be successful. I'll say a quick word about safety. Inflatable systems are pressure vessels. If you go look at the regulations and requirements for pressure vessels, they're long and lengthy because there's a lot of safety considerations. Again, we're not talking about a bounce house at 3 PSI pressure differential. We're talking about these inflatable systems are typically at, if you have a habitat, of course, it's going to be a 14 PSI pressure differential, which greatly increases a little bit of safety concerns. And if you're talking about other things like beams and things like that, you might go up to 60 PSI. And when you start getting at 60 PSI, things tend to get a little bit more sporty. Like I said, I had the tire on my road bike go out the other day, and it sounded like a gunshot. So you have to make sure your teams do proper safety on your inflatable systems. Okay, so we can go next slide, I guess. Unless anybody else wants, feel free to jump in if they want. And so another thing about the Big Idea Challenge, you're not used to this in your typical student classroom work. We're not giving you a problem that already has a solution, with a lot of constraints, and we've already developed a solution for it. We're asking you to identify a need and come up with an innovative solution to meet that need. And so the constraints are pretty minimal. We want you to do the systems engineering that's required to identify the constraints, and make assumptions. We want you to go out and look for assumptions on what's the lander capabilities to get things on the moon. Make an assumption about how you're going to get your payload on the surface so that you can deploy it, and make sure your assumptions are reasonable and for the most part credible, because this is the kind of stuff we look for when we review the proposals. We want teams to have something that has potential future value for NASA. This isn't busy work. I don't know if Stacy will mention it later on, but this is funded by two groups. We're funded by the Space Technology Mission Directorate, where we have all kinds of different technology readiness levels. We have early stage innovation. We have tech maturation, where we take things from the lab and get into work in relevant environments. And that's pretty much along the lines of what you're doing. You're taking a concept, taking it out of the lab, and trying to test it in a relevant environment in the best way you can. And then we also have the technology demonstrations at the higher technology readiness levels. But like I said, we're funded by the Game Changing Technology Development Program, which is in that mid TRL range. And we're also funded by the Office of STEM Education. And I think the valuable lessons that you're going to get in systems engineering and program management that are beyond what you typically get in a classroom is very valuable from the point of view of the Office of STEM Education. So think about that as you're going through. This is a great learning experience, and not only if you don't make it through the down select, you'll certainly learn valuable proposal writing skills, which are critical for future work. So again, on the constraints, they're pretty minimal. We do have a constraint for, we want you to propose a tech demo mission by 2029. We have, I think Michael will talk a little bit about the CLPS program, but we have the Commercial Lunar Payload Services Program, where NASA now pays commercial companies to put payloads on the surface. And they're not cheap. By the mass, the cost to get a kilogram of payload on the surface is very high. And so if you're talking about a very high mass technology demonstration, it's going to be unlikely that we could fund it. But if you have a very effective technology demonstration at a relatively low mass that we could fly on a CLPS lander in 2029, it might be something that you can do a follow-on proposal and say, hey, we did the front end work on this. Proposed for a demonstration mission, and NASA just put out a solicitation along those lines. I think Lift 1. Maybe Stacy will put that in the team chat. Again, we're not requiring you to mesh with the Artemis plans. There's some plans out there for Artemis missions. We did Artemis 1. We're getting closer to Artemis 2, where they fly around the moon. Artemis 3 was originally intended to land on the lunar surface, but it might just be going to the gateway. And then Artemis 4 landing on the lunar surface. So, but you're not required to mesh with these plans. Think about what commercial companies might want to do on the lunar surface, and think about an operational payload in the mid-2030s after you do your technology demonstration. Sorry, an operational system in the mid-2030s that can satisfy a need on the lunar surface. It might be a science need. It might be an operational need. For instance, you might look at selling services to offload payloads and transport it to where you need. So, and you're selling your concept. Think about the Shark Tank. You guys have all watched Shark Tank. You want to sell up. You want to make a pitch to us so that we want to fund your proposal, and because we're excited to see what you're going to produce out of this. So, yeah, again, if any other judges want to chip in, feel free. I'll stop for a second. All right, I'll move on with the scope again. Again, I talked about the systems engineering aspect of this. You're going to have to do your project management skills. You're going to have to make a credible budget. You're going to have to make a credible schedule. You're going to have to look at your team skills and see what you can actually achieve during the time frame of the lunar. We want the teams to be successful. If you're not successful, we're sort of wasting our money because we won't have a demonstration and get any data at the end of this. And so when we look at those proposals, whether it be you're just testing a subsystem or you think you can do a complete system with a larger team, we want you to be successful. The things you look at are procurement delays. Make sure you understand your university procurement processes. That can also create huge delays. Look at your budget and the materials that you want to purchase. You might have to get things fabricated. Go get cost estimates. You might have to buy materials. Typically the vast majority of your budget goes to pay for stipends and things like that, but you're going to have to buy some materials. Think about testing. If you want to do some environmental testing and put these things in a vacuum chamber to make sure they work in a vacuum, you might have to rent environmental test time, facility time from, say, the university or some other source. And so make sure you have this kind of stuff in the budget. We want to pitch things, and any good system engineer is going to take a need, he's going to decompose the system, and you can focus on your specific system of interest. And outside your system interest are external systems, and those are sort of somebody else's problem, but you should understand the interfaces and just make your assumptions to say, hey, we're going to have if you're not going to do pressure regulation, we're going to have a pressure regulation system, but it's an external system. We're focusing on the inflatable portion of the structural portion. And so what are the interfaces to that pressure management system? So scope your system of interest and make sure it's something that your team can do in the allocated time frame to be successful. And then mission starting point. Like I said, the infrastructure on the lunar surface is going to be quite limited in 2029 for a technology demonstration. By the mid-2030s, it is hoped that there'll be some infrastructure out there because we want crews to be able to stay at the Artemis base camp for 30 plus days, and so that we'll need some infrastructure, power systems. They'll need some type of habitat. They'll need some. They're looking at a pressurized rover with some robotics that could help you out. So, but like I said, that's your starting point, and make sure the technology readiness is such that you're not looking for unobtainium in 2029. You're looking for materials and technologies that'll be ready for a launch in 2029. So, anybody else have? Okay. All right. I guess we can go to the next one. Okay, and this is where I talked about the taxonomy. The links right there. This is, as the Space Technology Mission Directorate spent a lot of effort really laying out the technology needs to sustain presence on the lunar surface, and they broke it out into GO, which is the launch vehicles and how to get there. The land, which is the landing vehicles. A lot of that is for precision landing and avoiding hazards in the terrain autonomously, and a lot goes into entry systems for the Mars campaign and stuff like that. There'll be maybe an inflatable system for landing landing bags like we used on the Mars rover, which were definitely inflatable system. They help the Mars rovers get on the surface, but most of them are going to be and live and explore. The next two sections were live and explore. And even at the bottom of this page, you can't quite see us. I think it's surface systems, but each one of these has a PDF document associated with it, and they're broken up into slides. You can look at these different needs, technology needs, and then you teams can envision how are you going to satisfy that technology need. And so there's a lot of stuff there as far as potential use cases. We're going to need to get payloads off these landers. They don't get off by themselves, and so you might need a crane, a gantry, or some robotic system. And it could be a robot. It could be an inflatable system for the gantry. I'll send in some links on a challenge that we did for an autonomous lightweight lunar gantry for operations called ALGO through the GrabCAD, and it was an inflatable system. It's got all kinds of great ideas. So it could be another challenge I put in was a lunar heliostat for thermal regulation that had some concepts, had inflatable systems for the frame on the heliostat. Doug and company have done a lot of stuff on airlocks, inflatable airlocks that had much less package volume. So when you put them on the surface, you can inflate them and they will go to full size. And we also did a lot of minimalistic advanced soft hatch, basically a little fully inflatable airlock. We did a challenge earlier on with the linear seal. So there's all kinds of concepts for inflatable systems. You could be looking at actuators like Doug mentioned, and towers that maybe self-hardening. We'll talk about the environments in a minute, but one of the key environments is not what the moon has, but what it doesn't have, and that's wind and rain and other things. And so without wind, you can have a very lightweight structure, and it doesn't have to be tied down like it would on Earth. And so basically the surface of the moon doesn't change for a million years at a time. And so you can have these lightweight structures, and you don't have to worry about wind and rain and weather and things like that. But you do have to worry about landing plumes. I mean, they could, if you're too close to a landing zone, you might get blown down. But yeah, there's all kinds of things to think about in the lunar environment, and there's a lot of use cases out there, and I encourage you to go look at some of them, and some will be very non-intuitive.
Well, thank you, Doug, and thank you, Kevin. We really appreciate that intro and some direction on things to think about and providing some resources that the students can utilize as they move forward. So next, we're going to turn the microphone over to Dr. Michael Nord to tell us a little bit about LSII. Michael.
Hi, everybody. I'm Michael Nord. I work for Johns Hopkins Applied Physics Laboratory. This is my first year working on this project. And I am super excited about the moon. The United States actually hasn't landed anything on the moon in 50 years, but we have 2 launches to the moon that are happening in just the next couple of months, and something like a dozen or more scheduled for the next couple of years. So it's going to get really exciting on the moon really soon. At Johns Hopkins APL, I work for NASA under the Lunar Surface Innovation Initiative. This is an initiative NASA has founded to help NASA get ready, get prepared for the technologies they're going to need on the moon. Bringing in students, bringing in industries, bringing in academia, so we can all talk to each other and agree on things like standards that we're going to need to use on the moon, and technologies that we'll need to use on the moon. And then to leverage that consortium both individually, so that you can talk to other people that are interested in the moon, but then also once we've sort of built this network, that network is then useful for NASA to help them expedite technology development. Next slide, please. The fun thing about LSII is anyone can join. We just had our big fall meeting just 2 or 3 weeks ago, where the Lift 1 announcement was announced. Lift 1 is going to be the first lunar mission that is actually going to land on the moon and extract usable resources from what it finds there, and currently scheduled to launch in 2026. Yeah, so that was at our fall meeting. That was the big exciting announcement there. But yes, LSIC is free to join. There's the website, lsic.jhuapl.edu. We have twice yearly meetings that are both in person and virtual, but we also have 5 focus groups: surface power, in situ resource utilization, excavation and construction, extreme environments, and some others that have monthly meetings that are all done on Zoom, so they're all free to go to. And I'm going to just go ahead and say that going to some of those would be an excellent way to maybe get some ideas for what you might want to do in this challenge, or to find some people that are interested in the same kind of technologies you are, to start networking, so you can get your ideas socialized and out in front of the companies that are hopefully going to hire you to build cool stuff on the moon in the near future. And our fall meeting is, applications fall meeting. Oh yeah, so we do the fall meeting, we do 2 meetings a year. Spring is at Johns Hopkins Applied Physics here in Maryland. And then every fall we go to a different spot. One of our member institutions hosts our fall meeting every year. And we are taking applications for institutions to have that meeting in December of next year. So if your institution is interested in having a cool space meeting where hundreds of people come and talk about the moon, let them know. Maybe we could have the meeting at your institution next time. Next. Let's see. Oh, so this is not LSIC, but this is related enough that I wanted to talk to it. So, if a lot of people know about SpaceX and about Blue Origin, of course, and they are building rockets that are going to go to the moon. But as sort of actually, in my opinion, maybe even more exciting is something called the Commercial Lunar Payload Services Providers, which is called CLPS. You may have already heard us talk about CLPS. You'll definitely hear us talk about it some more. CLPS was started at NASA, but it is a commercial program. There are these companies, Blue Origin is in them, but there's 10 or 12 others, and they are all essentially licensed and ready to build landers for the lunar surface commercially. So if you happen to have $100 or $200 million that you've got nothing to do with, you can go to one of these companies and just buy your own lunar lander. And this is just really exciting because, before, if you wanted to go to the moon, you essentially had to be NASA, or you had to be, another government space agency. Now it's a commercial service you can buy. And like I just said, the first 2 launches are coming up. Those launches are about half or so of the things that are going to be on those launches are bought and paid for by NASA. So, NASA loves scientific instrumentation and all sorts of technology demonstrations for the moon. But the other half of the payloads that are going on there were bought by commercial companies. There are commercial companies that are testing out cell phone communications on the moon. There are commercial companies that are testing out different materials on the moon. There are companies that just want to have their logo on the moon. So going to the moon is sort of no longer just something for government agencies to do. Commercial companies can do it too. And so as you think about your technologies that you want to develop here, the big lunar landers, the Blue Origins and the SpaceX, might be the way that they go, but it's actually much more likely that one of these commercial companies would be the ones that actually send your technologies to the moon. And I think that's the 3 slides for me. Yes.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Those companies would also be excellent places to start networking, talking to people, finding out what technology needs they have. Hopefully you can bump into some of those people at some of the LSIC meetings.
Definitely. Thank you so much, Michael. And just to kind of tack onto a little bit about what he was saying, the Big Idea Challenge, when you start participating in it, you actually become part of this broader NASA and aerospace industry family. And one of the reasons that we are so excited to be able to partner with APL and all the work that they do through LSIC is because it is an opportunity for you guys to get involved like no other. So we really, truly encourage you, as soon as we're done here, go sign up for LSIC, make sure that you attend some of the meetings, you will be able to network with the industry leaders out there, with other people who are thinking about the same sorts of things that you're thinking about, and just get to collaborate and network. And that is how you are going to be successful in the Big Idea Challenge. So definitely make use of those resources available to you. All right, let's quickly jump into some proposal tips. It sounds obvious, but use the proposal checklist. We've actually put into the guidelines, and there's a link here whenever we post this on our FAQs that has every single thing you need to make sure that you have in your proposal. We know that this is an intensive proposal. There's a lot of components to it. We know that you guys put blood, sweat, and tears into developing these proposals. And so we would hate for you just to miss one thing and have the proposal be out of compliance. Use that proposal checklist, check everything off, and make sure that you've got a full package before you go in and submit it. And then also really carefully look at the proposal evaluation criteria as you're putting that proposal together. There's no secrets in how the judges are going to be evaluating your proposal. We have put it all out there for you, including the assessment criteria and what would be considered excellent, good, very good, or poor responses to each of the different things that you're going to be evaluated on. So try to look at your proposal through that lens of the evaluation criteria, because that's how the judges are going to be reviewing your proposal. And so that will be really, really beneficial to you if you do that. Kevin earlier kind of touched on the Shark Tank pitch ideas, how you should also be looking at your proposal. And it's worth mentioning again here that this proposal is you selling your idea. It's you selling your idea to NASA, to APL, to industry, to aerospace industry. And so everybody always asks us, like, well, how in depth do we need to be? Do we need to be more deep? Should we have more breadth? Like, what do we need to do? And the answer to that is basically include enough information in your proposal that will convince the judges that your proposed concept is both credible and valuable. And then you've got to provide confidence that your team can successfully implement the work proposed. That's the easiest way to answer that question that we get all of the time. So make sure your proposal is at the convincing level. Convince those judges to buy into your idea and to fund it and award it and give you the time to work on it next year. So the budget for the Big Idea Challenge is a little bit different, a lot different than many, many other proposals that you've seen where you only have to submit one budget. Kevin mentioned earlier that this program is funded by two different entities, and the funding sources come in completely different vehicles, and that's why we actually have to have a two-phased budget required. Phase 1 is for the first half of the work, and phase 2 is for the second half of the work. And unlike in previous years, this year you actually get to submit phase 1 and phase 2 budgets together that amount to an equal split. So phase 1 is 50%, phase 2 is 50% of your effort. So when you submit those, make sure that it is an equal 50-50 split. Especially if you've proposed in the past, we know that those percentages have been a little bit different in years past. One thing, I mentioned earlier, this is a super intensive proposal. We know, we get it, we totally understand. And as such, there are multiple people that you're going to have to be relying on to be able to get the things that you need for the proposal, like all of the compliance letters and the letters of review and approval from your university. So something that we see year after year is we get some teams that are at the last minute, the last hour before the proposal is due, they're begging us for an extension because they haven't gotten the letter back from their Office of Sponsored Programs yet, and they need more time. But we are not able to provide extensions. And so I want to be really, really clear that proposals are due on February 1st at 11:59 p.m., 1 minute before midnight. And the proposal submission form actually just closes right at that time, and there won't be any extensions or the ability to submit. So plan ahead, make all of the requests for all the things that are on that proposal checklist and all the letters of compliance review, your space grant letter, all of those things. Make sure that you've given the folks at the university and at Space Grant more than enough time to get those letters and forms filled out for you and back to you in time for you to be able to submit. So that's a stumbling block that we see a lot of teams fall into, and want to really encourage you to, the more you plan ahead, the better position that you'll be in. One of the new things that we're really excited about this year in your proposal that is different from previous years. So if you participated in the past, take note that this is a big new change. We, and I say we, collective we from NASA, have a really big focus on diversity, inclusion, and equity, and want to make sure that that is really shining through all of the programs that we have. And so this year, it's actually built into part of the proposal requirements and is included in the proposal evaluation criteria that you're going to see. So you're going to need to include a section really kind of describing how your team is going to promote and implement the values of a diverse and inclusive scientific, engineering, and technology community to enhance the overall development of your proposed solution. This is something that's incredibly valuable to NASA. And it's the section where you can really discuss planned interactions or partnerships that you may have with industry, with other government agencies, with nonprofit laboratories, and even other universities. This is also where you can discuss how diversity and inclusion is integrated into your specific team. Have you enabled opportunities for a variety of technical disciplines, cultural backgrounds, creativity, diversity of thought? Have you involved underrepresented groups, women, underrepresented minorities, veterans, persons with disabilities, et cetera? So it does not have to be a really long, in-depth section, but we want to know that you all are thinking about this because we know that diversity brings in really creative solutions, and we want that to be emulated in the Big Idea Challenge, just like it is within the larger NASA community. And then finally, before we jump into those questions, we want to provide a reminder that the Big Idea Challenge gives out a pretty significant chunk of funding and a little bit more time than a lot of university higher education type challenges. And we give that amount of money so that you can really have the ability to do good demonstrations, to do good testing. As you are putting your proposal together, really remember that verification testing is of the utmost importance. We really want you to pay attention to the test planning in the proposal, and the judges are not going to want to be looking to see that it was an afterthought or just at the very end kind of a thing, or that, oh, we'll get to it later. They're going to want to see at the proposal stage that you've already put in some thought to how you're going to be doing your testing. So just really wanted to give you the encouragement to be thinking about that now. All right, moving on to kind of the right-hand side of that screen. Oh, I'm going to ask Amy if you don't mind going back real quick. These are just some of the upcoming deadlines, milestones, in the challenge. I mentioned earlier about the proposal deadline being February 1st. And by February 29th, it's a leap year day. We don't get many of those, once every 4 years. We're going to let all teams who submit a proposal know about their selection status one way or the other at that point. Finalists will likely have a feature story also on the NASA page kind of announcing who they are and what their concepts are, but everybody will be notified at the same time. And then I did want to just mention very briefly that we are planning on having the Big Idea Forum in the early part of November. And we have listed everywhere in the solicitation guidelines that this is tentative at this point. And I wanted to just take a minute to explain kind of what's going on. So although an in-person culminating forum is planned for November, it's really contingent upon the continued availability of NASA funding for next fiscal year, which their fiscal year for FY25 actually starts October instead of at the end of the calendar year. But at the time that we put the solicitation out, and even now, the FY25 budget is pretty unknown at this point. And as such, the challenge is really tentatively planned to end in September 30th. But it is NASA's strong desire to really continue the challenge as outlined for the full timeline and be able to have that forum in November. So when you are putting your proposals together, I know that's a little bit confusing, but plan on being able to have the forum. That's how we want your proposals to be sent to us, as if we were going to go all the way through the forum stage. Your schedule, your budget, it should go all the way through the end of the forum, and your planning on your testing and development, all that stuff can still happen after September, all the way up through to the forum. So if for some reason the funding wouldn't come through and we would have to end the challenge on September 30th, you'd still have the opportunity to keep using the funding that you had to finish out your project. And we provide information to the finalist teams on how they can get their final testing results to NASA. But we are all crossing our fingers that we won't come to that, and that we'll actually be able to have the full forum and be able to see you guys in person and see some of those really cool inflatable demonstrations at NASA's Langley Research Center is what we're hoping for next year. So plan your budget, plan your schedule all the way through the end of the forum, and let's all put it out into the universe that we're going to have this forum, because I believe it. It's going to happen. Okay, so let's dive into some of those questions we received in advance. I'm going to go ahead and read the question, and then Kevin, Doug, Michael, any of the judges that are on the call, feel free to read the answer out. And any of the judges, we really encourage you to jump in and offer any elaboration on anything that's not here in writing if you feel it's important for the students to know. So starting with our first question, and these are kind of the more technical related questions. Are we able to assume the contracted companies SpaceX and Blue Origin are the landing systems?
The two companies that I mentioned earlier that are launching, one is launching the day before Christmas, and then one in January, are Intuitive Machines and Astrobotic. No, there are a dozen or so CLPS providers, and any of them might be your ticket to the moon. All their different landers have different capabilities in terms of communications and how much mass they can land and all those different things. But yeah, I would not assume it's going to be one of those big spaceships that hopefully are going to carry humans there later. Although, if your technology is proven out eventually, you could certainly go there on one of those larger landers and be used by the astronauts.
Yeah, I'll just add that the SpaceX and Blue Origin are very low, early in their development phase. And so the commercial landers that Michael talked about, Astrobotics, Intuitive Machines, and others, they're ready to launch. And so they have a very high technology readiness. And so obviously they'll be improved and made better over time. But it's best if your solutions don't require a specific lander unless it's just something like payload mass. And again, we're trying to keep the mass to a minimum for a technology demonstration. So requiring a Blue Origin that has roughly that they advertise would have a 3,000 kilogram payload, and taking up the whole payload would be pretty sporty as far as cost-effective technology demonstration. So make your technology demonstrations as agnostic and flexible as possible, so that they can be delivered to the lunar surface with any lander that can take the payload. Now, I'll just add that when we do this, we put out a bid to the CLPS providers, and they basically put in proposals on who will launch the specific payloads. We don't select the CLPS provider. It's a competitive bid on who's going to put it on the surface.
All right, the next question you've already touched on, but we'll just ask it one more time. What are the mass constraints?
I'll just summarize. There's a lot of words there. I'll summarize very quickly. I wouldn't think about how much mass can I launch? I would think, how much mass can I save? Is there some mission that takes X kilograms now, but if you made it inflatable, it would only take 1/10 of that? Or is there some mission which I can't do at all without inflatables, which I could suddenly make possible with inflatables?
Okay, I think that question has been asked and answered. Moving on, how do you rule a project effectively pushing feasibility versus something that can be attained within the given time frame?
Yeah, I'll take a stab at it. Like I said, when you talk about pushing feasibility, I think you're talking about lower technology readiness and trying to get that ready. And if you look at the time to go from a concept that's not proven to a flight worthy system, it's typically years to get to that point. And so typically in the game changing program, we like to bring technologies from what's called like TRL 3, 4, especially something that's operating in the laboratory, and move it on to a test in a relevant environment. And that relevant environment, again, might be a vacuum chamber or some type of, thermal testing, or using dust, lunar dust simulant to make sure that, a rover or some actuator can operate for long periods of time in a dust environment. So that's really what we're hoping to get from you at this time, is to have that concept that's feasible to raise the technology readiness level 1 or 2, through a fabrication, and then a demonstration. The demonstration is basically going to be a verification of something in some type of testing, and that's exactly, like I said, the game-changing projects. And again, we're looking at a 2029 target. I mean, it's not a hard target, but that's something, that's something that your teams can shoot for, that you can have this ready and tested in relevant environments. And then it's going to be another step to get it to the point where it's flight ready for a technology demonstration mission. So think about that kind of stuff. And we're not going to penalize you for taking the lower TRL that's higher reward. So typically, if you have a low TRL, you're trying to advance that, is because there's a higher reward, because advancing these low technology readiness technologies is obviously a higher risk than taking one that's already been tested at a TRL of 6, and bringing it up to a flight demo. So it's a judgment call. You teams have to think about that. And again, if you're going to the subsystem level and you're trying to focus on, show that a key enabling subsystem, for an inflatable, for one of your concepts, that's a great thing, because if you raise the TRL on just a subsystem, it shows the feasibility of your concept a lot better too. So it can be a lot of things. And so it's going to be a judgment call by the judges on which one has the most value. And I can't say, because there's so many unknowns and variability in that. I hope that answered the question, because it's a little hard.
I think it did. Our next question was also touched on just a little bit. This team wants to know what lunar infrastructure level, for example, L1, or I'm sorry, LI1 through LI9, can be assumed at the time of our arrival, and what other technology will be present on the moon during the mission?
I think by 2029, not a whole lot, right? We'll have landed Artemis 3 and perhaps Artemis 4 by then. I'm hoping we will have picked the site for the Artemis base camp and maybe started building some infrastructure there, but there's not going to be a whole lot there. You're going to have to kind of rely mostly on what you bring with you.
Thank you. All right, our next question. In the guidelines, when you mention business case, do you mean commercial partners to help fund the development?
Yeah, I'll hit that one. Like I said, we talked about the Shark Tank concept and the use cases and identifying the need. If you don't satisfy a need, then obviously you probably don't have a very good business case that some stakeholder is going to want to have this system or fund the development of this system. So think about that. The business case is, you're going to satisfy a need, and somebody is going to want to pay for that capability. So that's the main one. And then when you talk about the customer, I just wanted to add, we encourage teams to go out, the industry. We encourage teams to go out there and talk to industry providers and say, hey, we're working on this. Do you guys want to either provide mentoring or technical support? And a lot of times we've had teams that get, a fairly significant amount of contributions from some of these industry things. And if the contribution might just be flat out funding, or they might provide, a lot of times they'll provide equipment that they have. They might provide some facility usage, or, some machining capability, some materials for free. So if you have a good idea, like I said, industry is very interested in being involved, not only if you have a good business case, but also there's a lot of outreach and potential, public affairs that benefit to that too, that say, hey, we're working with these university teams. And so I would expect if you have a good idea, there'll be industry that would be glad to work with you and maybe even provide cost sharing.
And I do want to actually add on to that, when you're thinking about who your customer might be, a customer could be any of the government agencies. It could be NASA. It could be Department of Defense. It could also be anybody from industry as well. So the word customer is pretty vague here. All right, moving on. For the timeline of operation, when would be an expected launch date of our system?
Yeah, I'll just real quick. We already discussed that a little bit, but in the guidelines, if you plan on doing a technology demonstration by 2029, and again, it's not a hard cap, but and then if you have an operational system, the mid 2030s would be a good time that you've done your technology demonstration, you've learned from it, and then you build an operational system that's deployed on the lunar surface in the mid 2030s. That seems reasonable.
All right, moving on to the next question. At what scale is the prototype expected to be given the resources that we have?
I'll try to take this one. So the short answer is there's no specific scale that we're going to give you to do this. It's sort of dependent on what your technology is and how you intend to demonstrate it. So if it's something small, like a muscle or a soft robotics muscle or something, and you can build it at full scale, because this is full scale, then that's what we would probably expect, for the budget that we're giving you. If it's something really massive and you can't build full scale within your budget, then you would want to do something subscale. And so the scale needs to be enough that you can get data from that subscale test in order to show feasibility at the full scale. So consider how your materials might scale up to that size, or if you're just testing a subcomponent of it, how that might be integrated into the full scale module. And so it's really a matter of how you present it to us, of what kind of test you're going to do and why you chose that scale and how it scales up.
Perfect. All right, moving on. Next question. How important is it to focus on the space factors such as avoiding lunar dust for a prototype? Can we focus more on the prototype's concepts for things like pneumatics or folding?
Yeah, sure. I'll take a stab. Engineering for the moon is not like engineering for the Earth, particularly when it comes to temperature extremes and, of course, dust and radiation. But I think, whatever your concept is, you're going to have to think of all those things, and then either decide, is radiation something we really need to worry about? So maybe you argue, well, this thing is only expected to operate for a week, and therefore it shouldn't degrade based on, radiation. So, this thing is going to be particularly sensitive to temperature. So maybe you need to pay a special attention to the lunar temperature environment. So given that there are these various, environments on the moon, I think going through and either, just giving a, we don't think we have to worry about this and here's why is an acceptable answer. Or we do think we need to worry about this and here's how we attempt to test that, maybe test in a vacuum chamber or maybe test in an oven or something like that.
Yeah, I was just going to add on, a lot of the things in the space environment are a little non-intuitive. When you're on the moon, of course, near the equator, there's roughly 14 days of daylight where the solar heating can be quite extreme, but on the backside of your structure, it's going to be extremely cold because it doesn't have any solar heating and it's radiated all its things. So the thermal gradients are a big issue. The nice thing about inflatables, the gas inside the inflatables can help equalize those thermal gradients. But think about things like on your materials as these if these materials get cold, they start getting brittle, and or if they get really hot, they can stretch, and so the thermal the thermal environment can also be beneficial. Think about if you filled your inflatable structure with CO2 and were worried about gas leakage during the lunar night, basically, if you don't heat it up, that CO2 would probably all freeze out and you would have solid CO2 inside your inflatable. And then it wouldn't, so think about that kind of stuff everybody knows about the ideal gas law, which is PV equals nRT. As the temperature has these drastic changes, you gotta have a pressure regulation system in these inflatables, unless it's a self-rigidizing structure. And so the thermal environment can be pretty difficult. Like I said, it can be advantageous also if you let that, as it gets cold, then the pressure decreases and it reduces the leakage over the lunar night, where in a lot of cases you might not be using the structure. We had one team that used the extreme cold to operate superconductor material for power distribution. And so there may be ways to take advantage of the lunar environment. It might not always be a detriment. It might be a benefit if your concept. And so concepts that can take advantage of the lunar environment have a big plus up. So think about that also.
Right. I mean, thermal gradients can be used to do work. So maybe you take advantage of that to make your structure move or bend or whatever. I'll note that LSIC has a course called Eclipse, which is it's either a half day or a full day, I forget right now. But we go through and we talk about all the different things that you need to think about if you're going to be engineering for the surface of the moon. So might be useful to sign up and virtually attend that.
Yeah.
Yes, and if anybody's interested in Eclipse, they can send me an email. We are in the process of developing it. NASA's reviewing it, and it's a resource for lunar surface environments and how to go about qualification and testing for the lunar surface.
And
Well, so
I want
thank you
to
for-
add on something. On the sunlight, also the temperature also change, but also surface electric charge is changing. For example, under sunlight, the lunar surface or material surface has a positive charge because of the photo emission effect. That means the strong UV to remove the electron from the material surface, that becomes the positive charge. So while in shade dark area, the lunar plasma is more dominant, so it has negative charging. So the shading area and bright area, it has a different charging. It has some the electric strong interaction between the lunar dust and then the object surface. So that is also have some difficulty to remove the lunar dust. And also, when you imagine some inflatable structure, usually white or yellowish color, that is usually Kevlar or some polyethylene fiber. So that is a white color. That means solar objectivity is low. So that has the minimum solar absorption to minimize the temperature increase. However, if you have some lunar dust, which is some dark color that has a higher solar sensitivity, the temperature of the system can change by the lunar dust contamination. So maybe you need to think about that some lunar dust contamination on the thermal equilibrium condition changing or some other effect.
Yeah, thanks, Jinho. I just wanted to add a couple other things. Jinho had mentioned UV. That's a big factor. The UV dose is pretty high on some of these materials, and of course the dust is very abrasive, and you don't think about, a lot of systems don't move. You may have an inflatable that like a gantry that's intended to move and that has dust, and so that movement will cause abrasion. But there's also just the thermal expansion. You get this lunar dust and these restraint layer fibers, and they can literally cut fibers over time. And so, yeah, the dust is also a very problematic thing. I just wanted to add real quick, make sure you look at your, there's some good sources on inflatable systems. Again, they basically take pretty limited shapes, a sphere, a cylinder with domed ends, or a torus, which is a cylinder wrapped around itself. And you can make those shapes a little bit different, but they're not nearly as mass efficient. And remember, we're looking at mass efficient things. And so, yeah, it does limit you in some of your concepts on the things on pressure vessels, and then there's hoop stress and things like that. So I encourage you to go look at the basic physics of inflatable structures, and there's a lot there to learn if you're not familiar with it.
I'd like to add, oftentimes a lot of technology developers are not familiar with the general requirements for spaceflight hardware. And so basic things that we look at, which is outgassing, for example. Your choice of materials can have a real impact on the outgassing properties of your hardware. So if you're making something that is supposed to be an optical component, having any of the hardware that you use surrounding that optical head or that sensor head are going to be critical to be very low outgassing, well behaved in space. Another one to think about is the radiation-induced total ionizing dose. So that, particularly for nonmetallics, can degrade materials over time. So think about materials that have already some proven survivability to certain levels that you'll see on the lunar surface. And there are guidelines online. LSIC also has a lot of those where you can see what is the expected total ionizing dose for an exposed material on the lunar surface.
Fantastic. That was super helpful. All right, we have one last question in the technical questions category. It's very specific to a team who's focusing on EVA shelter, but I think the response can be beneficial for everyone. So we'll ask it here. For the emergency EVA shelters, do we assume that the shelter will include its own air supply to pressurize the unit for inflation? And a follow-up is if the shelter needs to provide basic life support or if the astronauts will use their suits.
I'll take this one. So yeah, it really depends, like it says in the answer, on your use case. And so if you're looking at emergency shelter for if a crew member runs out of oxygen in their suit, then obviously you need some sort of additional oxygen or air to use inside that. If you're using it as a shelter for someone to take their suit off in a dusty environment, and maybe you're attached to a habitat, then maybe you can get that gas from a habitat and you don't have to provide it yourself. So it really just depends on your ConOps and what you actually want to use. I think what we want to see is just so that you make your assumptions clear to say where you're getting that gas from, for example, or what you're attached to, or what additional systems you might need to make your system work, those kind of things. So those kind of dependencies and assumptions, we just want them to be clearly stated and justified as to why you chose that. So this and a lot of other of the answers, it really depends on your ConOps and your design and what you're doing. So it is a very sort of vague answer and sort of vague sphere of potential designs, but that's why the answers are so vague, because you have a huge range to work inside of.
Yeah, I just add one thing that's very valuable in proposals is to define that system of interest. And so a lot of times you'll put you'll have a drawing with a dotted line around it, or, dotted border around it, say, this is my system of interest. And then you have lines going out, which would be the interfaces to the external systems. And like Doug said, one of those external systems might be your air supply. And so your focus is on that inflatable portion of it, and the air supply and external system, which isn't your system, but you have to interface to it and just have and your job is to just define the interface that's relatively credible and reasonable, and then you focus on your system of interest.
All right, we have 4 more questions we received in advance that we're going to talk about here. Let's rock and roll through those really quickly so that we can leave a few minutes at the end for folks to ask additional questions. Janice, I'm going to ask you to read these questions and I'll provide the answers.
Sounds good. So first and foremost, can Pathways students participate as team members?
So the answer is yes. They are able to participate anytime as long as it is a time when they are considered on leave without pay. So they can't be getting paid at the same time they're participating in the challenge through the Pathways program. They can also participate in the Big Idea Challenge at any point in time, as long as the next 2 criteria are met. The first is that no Big Idea Challenge funds can be used to support travel for them when they are in an active federal work status. So during a time frame when they're actively working and receiving pay as a Pathway student. And then as long as the other criteria is met, which is during times of active work at a government agency, the Pathways interns can participate only if their paid work is not directly related to the Big Idea project. So NASA can't be paying you to do work on inflatables or on soft good structures that could potentially be used on inflatables while you're also participating on the Big Idea Challenge. But if your Pathways project is completely unrelated, maybe you're looking at studies on rocks on Mars, I don't know. If your Pathways project is to look at rocks on Mars, then yes, you could participate in the Lunar Challenge, no problem, there's no conflict or perception of a double payment going to you from the government, which is really kind of what it all boils down to. Next question.
Great, thanks, Stacy. What are the most common threats astronauts face to physical health and environment safety on the moon?
So in a nutshell, radiation, lunar dust, low gravity, isolation, and micrometeoroid impact, and the damage that can cause on the inflatable structures, puncture wounds, things of that nature, rips.
And, no air. It's also.
That too.
What do you think are the most surprising or unexpected risks in the lunar environment?
Yeah, we've mentioned this before, but the temperature swings on the moon are crazy. 120 degrees centigrade, so hotter than water boiling in the daytime, and then almost not quite down to liquid nitrogen temperatures at night. So that is, you add that to, there's no air, so there's no way you can't get the insulating qualities of air or the ability of air to wick heat away. Thermal is a big problem on the moon.
And I add something that if you go to the South Pole, there is some area which has no sunset. So always some crazy angle of the solar illumination, and also some areas that never the sunrise. So like inside the crater, the permanently dark and very extremely cold. So you need to think about the South Pole the condition.
I think something also to consider is that it's not only that you're going to be on these extremes all the time, it's that whenever the illumination changes, you will have that shock-like temperature change. And so really considering that for your materials, how they respond to shock-like temperature changes to those extremes, it's important to test appropriately for that.
Great. Anyone else want to chime in?
I think micrometer impact is a big one. So making sure that you have proper protection, blankets, Whipple shields, etc. Really consider how you can have how hardware can be resilient to that or repairable in some cases, because there's going to be your outer layers there's no way to go around it. You're going to have some micrometers impacting your hardware if it's going to be traversing the lunar surface or going around, or if it's going to be for a habitat. So thinking about durability and maintaining it for a certain period of time.
Great. So our next question is, do we have access to resources about day-to-day activities in the lives of astronauts who will be living on the moon?
I wish I could tell you that we're already working on the schedules of the astronauts that are going to be living and working on the moon, but it's still a bit off. But what they do on the ISS is going to be pretty close. You know, they're going to need 8 hours to sleep, and you know, they're going to need time to blow off steam, and they're going to spend a lot of time doing science and doing maintenance. So that would be a reasonable. You could take the schedule of an ISS astronaut as a baseline anyway.
Thank you. And lastly, for programmatic questions, if we have later questions, is there someone we can contact to ask those? Stacy, I think you're muted. She is not. Okay, I can answer this one. If you have any questions moving forward, you can send them to bigidea@nianet.org. Our program team will look to answer these directly with you, and then the answers will be posted on our frequently asked questions page so everyone can see those and see if they're relevant to their projects. We also encourage you to look at the frequently asked questions page frequently for updates and anything that may be relevant that you may have to ask here, or another question that arises in the future may be already asked on that frequently asked questions page. So take a look there before you send an email, but definitely feel free to reach out with any questions. And moving along, Amy, if you'll go to the next slide. We did receive several questions that were beyond the scope of a typical inflatable structures concept. And so we did include those in these next slides. We will not actually answer those verbally here, but they are contained in these slides in case you need them, or if you're the team that's asking these questions. And just see that note there that the proposals that you should be focusing on are about the inflatable technology of the system or the subsystem being proposed. So make sure you're carefully reading the guidelines and attending to those. And if any other judges wanted to chime in on that, go ahead. Otherwise, we'll flip through these slides, these next ones. And in case you missed it earlier, we will be posting these on the Big Idea Challenge website, the slides. So we went through those very fast. So if you're the team that asked those questions, you'll be able to go back and take a peek at those. And at this time, it looks like we have about 7 minutes left in the call where we can open it up to additional questions. If you have a question, feel free to raise your hand. Or I know I've seen a few come through in the chat, so we can start there while folks are getting themselves together to raise their hand. Amy, do you have the first one that has been asked on here?
Yep, I have that up. William Dortch asked, what if NASA desires a specific design component of the proposal being displayed based on the design system presented? ? Does the project change, or could the university continue with the original proposal?
Yeah, I was just trying to understand that question a little bit. It's rare. Typically, if we select a proposal, it's rare that we'll go in and say, "Hey, you should change this." We have made some recommendations for things that might make the proposals a little bit more feasible, but but overall, I don't expect any NASA asking for any design changes after the teams get the go ahead. And some of that is going to be up to the teams. There is, there is going to be some flexibility if they find something out they cannot purchase a certain material or they have to make some changes. That's something we see in the midpoint reviews and things like that. And we may call the teams and give some recommendations, but I think overall it's unlikely that we're going to ask for specific design component changes. I think that's what they asked, and so if I misread that wrong, let me know.
Yep, and thanks, Kevin. Next we had, how large of thermal gradients should we account for? And that was from James Wade.
It's a pretty easy one. It's based on your use case. If you're going to the to the lunar poles, then that data is out there, and so it depends on your use case. We don't want to go and say, hey, you've got to reach this temperature range when it's not applicable to your use case. You may have an inflatable system that goes inside a habitat that has basically normal environmental conditions, and so it depends on your use case. That's it.
Okay, and there's another question that kind of, I guess, following up on that. Stella asked, what is the difference between a shelter and a habitat? Good question.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think for me, the difference is the habitat is designed for a certain life, probably a really long life. We're looking at, I think it said in one of the slides, maybe a 30-day mission at a time for a certain amount of crew member. And then from a requirements standpoint, and this is a little in the weeds, but to try to make the point relevant, in a normal habitat structure, you have to certify it to a factor of safety times your operational life. So if your operational life in this case is 15 years, for example, for soft goods, you certify it for 60 years. It's a factor of safety of 4. So with a shelter, if you don't expect, fully operational for 15 years long, then those factors are different. So basically the difference in my mind is how you design it and kind of what kind of lifetime it has. A habitat is going to have a much longer life. It's going to be more stringent because it's the primary living habitat. A shelter might be something that's temporary. It only needs to be pressurized for a certain amount of time, a little less safety factors, lower. Because the crew can always go back to the habitat later in case something goes wrong with the shelter.
Or, a shelter doesn't necessarily need to be pressurized, right? Your lunar rover, when you're not using it, maybe you don't want to just leave it out on the surface where it gets hit by ultraviolet radiation and micrometeorites. Maybe you want to put it in, effectively a shed, right? That gives your equipment a little bit of protection.
Yeah, that is a good question, and it's sort of a judgment call. We'll have habitats on the lunar surface, as Doug mentioned, that have very rigorous requirements, but there also may be just pressurized workspace so that you can bring a rover in there and change out a wheel without doing it in a full astronaut suit or having your pressurized gloves. And so the pressurized workspace would be a temporary facility just for doing short-term operations, and not the same thing as a habitat where it has to have all the functions that keep the crew healthy and hale. So yeah, it gets to be a little bit of a fine line, and we can't give a definitive answer on that. In the past, we've done pressurized greenhouses that are inflatables, and certainly yeah, that gets to be sort of an interesting question also.
Hey, thanks, guys. We had one from the Rowan team. Our team took a different approach than the systems mentioned today. We have a fundamental technology we are proposing to improve inflatable structures. Is this something that fits in the big idea?
Again, without knowing more on this one, they should have a use case, And if what they're doing is going to improve the inflatable structure to make that inflatable use case more cost effective or more efficient in some manner, then certainly they can work on this technology and demonstrate it focused on being able to enable a specific use case on the lunar surface. But whatever they do, they have to target some use case and show that their effort is going to improve that. I hope that makes sense. Feel free to add in your thoughts.
And I think we have one more question. It will take us over just a little bit, but I think we'll go ahead and answer that one for everybody. Do current NASA spacesuit technologies include inflatable technologies?
Well, so the spacesuit itself is basically an inflatable. It's a pressurized soft goods structure. So, you know, in that sense, yes. But there are no, as far as I know, and right now spacesuits are being developed by commercial companies, so NASA doesn't have a huge insight into what they're doing, but like NASA reference designs of suits and previous suits that have been used, there's no secondary, you know, pressure vessel inside the suit itself.
Great. Thank you to our judges and to our co-chairs for taking the time. I am going to wrap up this Q&A session 1 minute overtime, 2 once I'm done. And just remind everybody that the Q&A transcript will be made available on that frequently asked questions webpage next week. If you have any remaining questions, please email bigidea@nianet.org. Moving forward, remember that very important deadline, no extensions. February 1st is the proposal and video submission deadline. Make sure you have all of your materials set and ready to go by 11:59. And teams will be notified of their selection status on February 29th. It's leap year day. You can wish me a happy birthday when you submit them or when you find them out. Feel free to respond. I'll be celebrating that weekend. And thanks to everyone for attending. We really, as Stacy said, as everyone said here on this call, we truly look forward to your concepts. We're looking forward to the diversity of them, and we can't wait to see what comes in on February 1st. So best of luck, and feel free to reach out whenever you have a question. Thank you so much.